Welcome, dear listener. Today we journey together into the depths of human society, inspired by the timeless wisdom of Rudolf Steiner. We will explore how the spiritual, political, and economic spheres of life are intertwined, and why the renewal of society depends on understanding the forces moving within human hearts. As we reflect on the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, let us see them not as mere words, but as living currents capable of transforming the world around us. If you feel drawn to this path of insight, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe so that others too may join this journey of awareness. Stay with us and let these thoughts awaken a deeper understanding within you. Years ago, at the quiet urging of friends who were shaken by the social wounds left behind by a great war, I released a small book into the world. It was not received as I had hoped. It was misunderstood almost everywhere. Many believed it to be another dream, another neatly drawn plan, another imagined system meant to repair a broken society from the outside. They saw it as a formula, a cure prescribed in theory for the deep disorder of human life, but that was never its purpose. The book was not written to promote new structures, nor to persuade the world to adopt a clever design. It was written as a call not to institutions, but to the human being. It spoke directly to human nature itself. Some examples I offered were meant only as illustrations, yet they were mistaken as conclusions. When I spoke of money, of labor, of value and exchange, it was not to outline an economic program, but to illuminate a deeper point. Anyone who truly wishes to influence human life must first listen to it. Not impose answers upon it, but hear what life itself is asking for. Only then can remedies arise that belong to the human soul, rather than abstract theories forced onto living reality. If one looks honestly at the social life of recent decades, without prejudice, without fixed opinions, one thing becomes clear. What humanity needs today already lives within it. Beneath the surface of events, beneath institutions and systems, there exists an unspoken will. It lives quietly in people's souls, unconscious, yet powerful. Everywhere this hidden movement can be felt. It does not need to be invented. It needs only to be recognized, spoken aloud, made conscious. That alone was my intention, not to declare what should be, but to point toward what is already silently desired. To say this is the direction humanity is trying to move, even if it does not yet know it. Many of today's social wounds exist because our outer structures contradict our inner longings. Institutions move one way, while the human heart moves another. There is little value now in promoting perfect systems on paper. We have entered an age where no social idea matters unless people can recognize themselves within it, unless it arises from an impulse they already carry, even unconsciously. We must therefore reckon with the democratic feeling that has taken root in the depths of humanity. Not democracy as opinion, but democracy as dignity. The sense that something is truly social only when people are enabled to express their own will, their own voice, their own insight. The real question then is this: under what conditions can people genuinely express what they feel and know to be true? It is easy to say that many things should be different. Far harder to see how many barriers stand in the way of turning understanding into reality. There are divisions of class and rank, deep distances between groups of people. These cannot be bridged by theory alone. They are woven into the will itself, into how each person has grown into their place in society. There are also economic structures we are born into and cannot simply step outside of. They shape us, often without our consent. And beyond these, there exists yet another obstacle. Those who might guide or lead are often confined not by circumstance, but by rigid ideas, by inherited beliefs, by intellectual habits they cannot rise beyond. Thus confusion spreads, not from one source, but from many. Yet when we look deeply, when we listen carefully to what has stirred in the unconscious of humanity over recent generations, we discover something unexpected. The true social problem does not live where we usually seek it. It arises alongside the rise of technology, the growing complexity of life, and a quiet belief that has strengthened over time, the belief in the absolute power of the centralized state. This belief grew steadily until it became unquestioned, so strong that even repeated failures, even profound disappointment, have not shaken it. And so the question remains, waiting not for new systems, but for new awareness. For when humanity becomes conscious of what it already seeks, the path forward reveals itself naturally. There is something else quietly bound to this rigid faith that takes hold of people once belief hardens into certainty. It is the belief that what one trusts must also be the final solution. That a single idea, a single system, can decide what is best for all, can shape the perfect political order, or at least convince us that we have built the best possible world. Yet this attitude overlooks something that becomes unmistakably clear to anyone who observes life without illusion. Those who allow their thinking to be guided by deeper realities come to recognize a simple truth. No institution, no matter how wisely conceived, remains valid forever. What is true for the living body is also true for society. Not as a shallow comparison, but as a living principle. In every organism, human, animal, or plant, growth alone is never enough. For life to unfold its powers, it must also age, it must decline, it must eventually fall away. Anyone who studies the human body closely discovers that this process is happening at every moment. Forces of growth and renewal are always present, but so are forces of breakdown and release. And strangely enough, humanity owes much to these dissolving forces. To move beyond a purely material view of life, one must look directly at where matter loosens its grip, where structure breaks down, where form begins to dissolve. It is precisely here that spiritual life awakens. The inner life of human beings is intimately connected to the quiet disintegration of matter. We cannot understand life by looking only at ascent and expansion. We must also recognize the constant presence of decay. This insight, though offered merely as illustration, reveals something essential about society as well. Society does not die in the way a human body does, but it is never still. It changes continually. Forces of progress and forces of decline are woven into its very fabric. Even the most thoughtful social designs, even those shaped by a clear understanding of present conditions, will inevitably reach a point where decline begins. Not because they were wrong, but because people, living, changing individuals, participate in them. What serves humanity well in one moment of history will carry within it, a few decades later, the seeds of its own undoing. This truth is often acknowledged in theory. People speak of change, of transformation, of the impermanence of systems. Yet in an age dominated by intellect alone, such insights rarely move beyond abstraction. Many imagine themselves practical thinkers while remaining trapped in ideas that never touch living reality. Thus we encounter a strange contradiction. People may admit that social life contains forces of decline, that it must continuously transform, that construction and dissolution always move together. And yet, when shaping society through their intentions, they act as if this were not so. Before the Great War, this contradiction could be clearly seen. When economic systems expanded, they often brought real satisfaction. As industries grew, wages rose, opportunities multiplied, life appeared to improve. Yet alongside this upward movement, other currents quietly flowed. Rising wages did not always translate into a genuinely higher quality of life. The very conditions created by progress began to cancel out its benefits. These patterns were observed, spoken about, even debated. But rarely were they met with deep awareness of the living social forces at work. And so society moved forward, not blind, but half-seeing, aware in thought, yet unprepared in practice for the transformations it had already set in motion. Today, as we stand at a turning point in history, it is no longer enough to study the surface of social life. We must look deeper, to the foundations beneath appearances, to the quiet forces that truly shape human destiny. When we do this, we begin to see that social life is not a single stream, but a meeting of distinct currents. One of these currents is the spiritual life of humanity. Though it cannot be separated from the rest of society, it follows its own inner laws. Its movement is tied to individual human beings, to personality, creativity, and inner freedom. The spiritual life of an age draws its strength from the people living within it, from their insight, their imagination, their courage to think anew. And from this source, all other areas of social life receive their nourishment. Consider how often society has changed because a single individual made a discovery or brought forth an invention. Entire worlds shift as a result. But if we ask where such breakthroughs truly arise, we are led inward, into the silent depths of the human soul. There, in solitude and concentration, something is born that later transforms whole regions of social life. Think, for example, of a mathematical insight quietly discovered in a private room, and yet capable of reshaping science, technology, and the structure of the modern world. When we observe social life realistically, we begin to understand that spiritual life is not a side effect of society. It is a distinct and essential branch of the whole. And if we ask what allows spiritual life to truly flourish, the answer is clear. It must arise from the innermost creative power of the human being. What grows freely from the depths of the soul, without coercion, without prescription, is precisely what serves the health of society as a whole. Yet another powerful force has shaped recent history, a force that has grown steadily, almost unnoticed. It is the impulse toward democracy, the longing of humanity for each person to have a voice in shaping the conditions of life. Whether this impulse pleases us or unsettles us is not the central issue. What matters is that it is real, it is alive, and it has become a decisive force in modern history. If we look carefully, we see that this democratic striving did not arise by chance. It emerged from inner necessity, from the spiritual life of Europe itself. In the minds of deeply thoughtful individuals, ideas took shape about how human beings might live together politically, not through domination, but through mutual recognition. The specific forms of these ideas are less important today than the intention behind them, the noble effort to understand human beings from within. Toward the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th, this search appeared in a widely shared form. Many sincere thinkers turned their attention to a fundamental question: what is the true relationship of human being to human being? They believed that by understanding human nature itself, they could discover what kind of social and legal order would allow people to thrive. They spoke of reason, of natural law, of principles that could be known through inner clarity. They trusted that careful thought could reveal which institutions were most humane, most just, most aligned with human dignity. Later, however, a different approach arose. A school of thought emerged that rejected the idea that law could be discovered through inner understanding. Instead, it insisted that law must be studied historically, through customs, traditions, and inherited forms. Yet in rejecting inner insight, this view overlooked something essential. It failed to recognize that the spiritual life of humanity had grown inwardly barren, not because reason was false, but because it had become detached from living creativity. Rather than healing this sterility, people concluded that the human soul was incapable of discovering truth from within. And so attention turned outward, to history, to precedent, to what had already been formed. Law was no longer sought as a living expression of human nature, but as a record of what had once arisen. Thus, once again, humanity stood before a choice, between living insight and inherited form, between inner creativity and external authority. And the question remains open. There was a thinker whose independent spirit rose in protest against the unexamined worship of history. He sensed that if humanity looks only backward, only at what has already been, it loses the power to create what is needed now. When life is bound entirely to memory and precedent, its living forces rebel. Something elemental within the human being pushes against the weight of the past, seeking room to shape the present. From these inner forces there arises the possibility of forming new social relationships, not imposed by tradition, but shaped by conscious individuals. During the height of intellectualism in the 19th century, this tension became unmistakable. A deep struggle unfolded over the true foundations of law, and with it, over the nature of the state itself. For the state, after all, is nothing other than the sum of the institutions in which law takes form. When the ability to recognize the living roots of law was lost, clarity about the state disappeared with it. And so, not only in theory but in lived experience, the state became a question, a problem to be solved, for countless people. This struggle was most visible among the more conscious layers of society. Yet beneath the surface, something else was moving. Like a force tunneling upward, the democratic impulse pressed toward expression. When this impulse is truly understood, it leads us to approach the question of law far more deeply than is common today. Many assume it is obvious that law can be derived from the individual alone. Yet when modern thinkers attempt this, they often lose their footing. Law dissolves in their hands, becoming an empty form, a structure without substance. And so they declare that this form must be filled, that its content must be supplied from elsewhere, often from economic forces. Here we encounter a contradiction. On one side, there is a sense of helplessness, a feeling that human beings cannot truly discover law from within. On the other side, there is a persistent attempt to do exactly that. Yet the democratic spirit rebels against both. What it reveals is simple, yet radical. There is no universal law floating above human life. There is only the possibility that people come together and recognize one another. You ask something of me, I ask something of you. From this mutual recognition, law arises. Law is born not from abstraction, but from lived agreement, from the reality of human relationships. There can be no eternal law of reason standing apart from life itself. Law must continually be created anew, whenever people find the right foundation for understanding one another. This is why the democratic voice says, I wish to have a part in shaping the laws by which I live. Anyone who wishes to speak about law in a purely theoretical way cannot invent it from thought alone. They must observe how law actually appears among people and give it voice. Even in natural science, we do not invent the laws of nature. We listen, we observe, we allow reality to speak. But there is a profound difference here. The laws of nature are discovered. They already exist. The laws of society, however, must be created through human encounter. In this realm, human beings are creators, not in isolation, but together. Only through shared understanding can a social life arise that carries forward the deeper meaning of human evolution. This, at its heart, is the democratic spirit. And alongside this, a third force now demands attention. It is the intricate economic world that has grown in modern times, complex, interwoven, and powerful. This economic life follows laws of its own, distinct from the other realms. In the spiritual sphere, everything fruitful must arise from the creative individual. In the legal and political sphere, order emerges only through mutual agreement among people. But these two principles, individual creativity and shared understanding, do not operate in the same way within economic life. Here we stand before a different challenge, one that calls not for repetition of old ideas, but for a deeper reorganization of how human beings live and work together. In economic life, what comes into being cannot be decided by the individual alone. History has shown this clearly. During the height of intellectual confidence in the 19th century, many capable and respected people offered their opinions on economic matters. They spoke with assurance, often from positions of influence and experience, and within their own fields, their judgment was often sound. When questions arose about currency, trade, or monetary standards, there was no shortage of practical reasoning. In gatherings and associations, common sense seemed abundant. Predictions were made with confidence. Yet when time passed and reality unfolded, the results told a different story. What had been foreseen did not always come to pass. What was expected to dissolve became more rigid. What was predicted to simplify grew more complex. Here we encounter a subtle truth. In economic life, the kind of common sense that serves us well in spiritual matters cannot always be trusted. Gradually, it becomes clear that no single person, however intelligent or experienced, can reach valid economic judgments alone. In this sphere, understanding must arise collectively. True insight here is not the product of isolated thinking, nor of unfiltered opinion, but of cooperation, of many perspectives meeting one another across different forms of experience. Wisdom in economic life is born only when many voices are allowed to sound together. From this, a deeper picture of social life emerges. Human society unfolds in three distinct realms. In the realm of spiritual life, the individual must be free to speak. Here, creativity, insight, and inner truth belong to the single human being. In the realm of law and democracy, all must speak. What matters here is the human relationship itself, person to person, on the basis of shared dignity. But in economic life, neither individual judgment nor the undifferentiated voice of the masses can lead the way. Here, each person contributes what they genuinely know, their skill, their experience, their concrete understanding. From this meeting of expertise, a collective judgment can arise, not by chance, but through structured cooperation. For this to happen, associations must be formed in which differing perspectives can meet honestly, challenge one another, and mature into clarity. Only then can sound economic insight emerge. Thus, the whole of social life reveals itself as a threefold organism. Not imagined, not designed in abstraction, but observed directly from life itself. And yet, this too must be remembered. Every social organism, large or small, contains within it both forces of growth and forces of decline. Everything we introduce into social life carries with it the seeds of its own dissolution. For this reason, society requires continuous healing, a constant balancing, a living process of renewal. If we look back at societies where spiritual life once dominated all others, we see this clearly. In such cultures, politics and economics flowed directly from spiritual impulses. Social forms arose as expressions of inner meaning. But even here, spiritual life carried its own shadow. For wherever spiritual authority becomes all-encompassing, it tends to divide humanity into ranks, into roles, into classes. The rigid structures of caste did not arise by accident. They followed naturally from a society shaped primarily by spiritual forces. Even ancient thinkers recognized this. They described ideal societies as divided into distinct groups, those who produce, those who guard, those who guide. Such divisions were seen as necessary expressions of spiritual order. Yet within these divisions, another force always awakens, the experience of individual personality. And this experience resists being confined. Thus, from within spiritual life itself continually arise gaps between people, between ranks, between classes, between roles. Now we turn our gaze toward the political realm, for it is here above all that we must seek to understand how labor, human effort, and shared responsibility have been shaped in the long unfolding of social life. And it is here that the next challenge reveals itself. Yes, here is the same transformation again, done with the same discipline and tone. Slow, reflective, poetic, entirely original in expression, shaped for YouTube audio narration, and safe for monetization, while preserving the deep structural meaning rather than the historical phrasing. Rewritten poetic narration, audio style. It is precisely because ancient spiritual rule gradually hardened into political order governed by law that the question of labor emerged. When individuals began to claim their rights, a new demand arose that human work itself be meaningfully woven into the fabric of society. As law loosened its bond with religion and moved steadily toward democratic form, something subtle entered human life, a tendency toward formality, toward thinking in rigid structures. Law did not arise from isolated reasoning. It was born from one human being speaking to another. And yet, from this shared exchange, a living system of law emerged, one inclined toward logic, toward clear structure, toward formal thought. Humanity, however, moves through history in phases of imbalance. There was an age dominated by spiritual authority, and later, an age dominated by the state. In these phases, the logical element of social life was refined and intensified. Consider how much human thinking has been devoted to law across the centuries. This concentration sharpened the intellect, but it also trained humanity in abstraction. Gradually, thinking became less concrete, less rooted in lived experience, and more distant from life itself. What humanity mastered in one domain was eventually extended to all domains. Even religion, once grounded in direct spiritual experience, was drawn into legal thinking. The divine became judge, cosmic order became moral verdict. This shifted the medieval soul profoundly. With it came a habit, the habit of living through abstractions. People began to organize their lives according to concepts rather than realities. Abstractions spread outward, into religion, into education, into economics. Trust grew in the all-encompassing power of the state, with its rules, its systems, its administrative logic. It was considered progress when education itself was absorbed fully into the machinery of governance. But once captured there, education could not escape the abstract patterns of law. Economic life followed a similar path. It too was drawn under the authority of centralized administration. When modern economic thinking emerged, many believed that the state should stand above all, directing and organizing the flow of work and resources. Yet in doing so, other realms of life were subjected to abstraction. This may sound theoretical, but it is deeply practical. Consider education. In our age, committees gather with good intentions. They discuss methods, design curricula, allocate hours, refine procedures. And often they do this intelligently. They create excellent plans, guidelines that appear flawless on paper. There is no shortage of programs. Every movement writes one. Every institution drafts another. Each promises improvement. These programs are not foolish. They are often thoughtful. No one doubts their sincerity. But sincerity is not the issue. What we invent conceptually can be imposed on reality, yet reality does not necessarily respond by becoming more humane. That is the decisive point. We have reached a dead end in our faith in programs. History has shown this clearly. Even the most idealistic plans, crafted with care for the good of humanity, collapse when they meet the complexity of life. Grand visions drawn from intellect alone shatter upon contact with reality. From this, education has much to learn. Teaching cannot be governed by directives. Rules belong to politics and law. Education belongs to life. You may issue instructions with the noblest intentions, but what actually takes place depends on the human beings who must carry them out. A school is not a program. It is a community of teachers, each with unique abilities, limitations, and inner strengths. Only what grows from these living personalities can truly be realized. To educate, one must sense the human being. One must work with what is alive, not with what is merely written. And this, more than any policy or plan, is what determines whether society remains human. What must be done cannot be decided once and for all. Each day it must be discovered anew, out of the living reality of the individual human being. No comprehensive program can accomplish this. Programs remain abstractions. They hover above life without touching it. Only life itself can give birth to what is truly needed. Imagine an extreme case. Suppose a subject is taught only by teachers of modest ability. Give them time, freedom from daily demands, and space to think, and they will surely produce sensible educational goals and thoughtful regulations. Yet teaching itself is something entirely different. What matters there is not what can be written, but who the teacher is as a whole human being. There is a great difference between reckoning with what the intellect alone produces and reckoning with life itself. The intellect has a peculiar tendency. It always reaches beyond its proper bounds. It seeks to contain the world. But in real life, it must remain a tool, serving concrete activity, not ruling over it. When we reflect on how law arises, from human beings meeting one another as equals, we must admit something important. What humanity has developed here is entirely appropriate. People establish legal relationships through shared concepts, through abstract ideas of equality, because that is how they experience one another in democratic life. From this foundation, law rightly emerges, but something else does not. From democratic abstraction, we can only create what applies to people in general. We cannot create what must arise from the uniqueness of the individual. To speak plainly, what belongs to spiritual life cannot flow from democratic processes. The belief in the dominance of law and politics was historically necessary. When modern states were formed, they had to take responsibility for education, often rescuing it from authorities who no longer served it well. History should not be corrected backward, and yet we must see clearly what is now required. In recent years, a new movement has begun, one that seeks to shape the life of the spirit as something independent once again, a life with its own structure, its own responsibility, its own inner order, a life where what happens in the classroom flows from the vitality of the teacher, not from obedience to regulation. Though it was once considered progress to place spiritual life fully under state authority, we must now find the courage to reverse this path. Only then can the free human personality find expression within spiritual life, including education. There is no need to fear that authority will vanish. Where genuine creativity lives, a natural authority arises. People do not reject authority, they long for the right kind. They willingly follow those whose abilities offer something real. This can be seen where education is alive. In such places, authority is not imposed, it is recognized. Meanwhile, politics and law can continue on democratic foundations. Yet even here, a warning must be heard. Because of its tendency toward abstraction, the state carries within it the seeds of decline. Those who observe political life closely see how easily people become detached from concrete realities. This abstraction becomes especially visible in the realm of capital. The circulation of money has grown increasingly abstract. And this abstraction is rooted deeply in political life itself. Capital is often criticized, especially by the masses, yet many of these attacks miss the deeper truth. To abolish capital entirely would require abolishing modern social life itself. For modern society depends on the division of labor, and the division of labor inevitably gives rise to capital. Today, a great portion of capital exists not as wealth in the abstract, but as the means of production. The essential point is this: capitalism is a necessary feature of modern life. And yet, when capital becomes nationalized, when it is severed from concrete human activity, money drifts away from life. It loses its grounding, it becomes abstract. And abstraction, wherever it dominates, quietly prepares the forces of decline. By the 19th century, this tendency toward abstraction had gone so far that what moved through social life was almost entirely detached from concrete human activity. What circulated freely was no longer work itself, nor need, nor direct human effort, but money. Money became like a bloodless idea separated from the living body of life. A single sum carried in one's pocket could stand for almost anything: a tool, a service, a spiritual offering, a distant possibility. It related to real activity as a general concept relates to lived experience. And from this separation, crises inevitably arose. These crises have been studied, theorized, and named. Some schools of thought have tried to trace them to a single cause. But life is never that simple. In reality, the same disturbance may arise from opposite conditions. There can be an excess of capital, too much circulating without purpose, and crisis follows. There can also be a scarcity of capital, too little available to serve real needs, and crisis follows again. These are different illnesses, with different origins. Yet even today they are rarely examined with true objectivity. This reveals a deeper truth. A single phenomenon in social life may arise from many causes at once. Just as spiritual life, when left to itself, tends to create divisions of rank and class, so economic life, moving rightly toward abstraction, carries a double tendency. On one side, it generates the productive forces necessary for modern civilization. On the other, it gives rise to instability, because capital becomes indifferent, usable for any purpose, detached from specific human needs. When people perceive this, they become reformers. They seek remedies, they design cures. But here they meet a limit. Though each individual contributes experience and insight to economic life, no single person can determine its overall form. For this reason, economic life requires something new. Not the state, not the isolated individual, but association. An association is not a bureaucracy. It is not an organization imposed from above. It is not a combination or cartel. It comes into being when individuals within the economy flow together, each bringing what they truly know. No one receives instructions from a central authority. Each contributes their concrete knowledge, their lived experience, their capacity. Out of this collaboration, out of mutual agreement, economic life takes shape. Only from such associations can a living economy arise. These associations will come into being. They are not fantasies. They arise from deep, often unconscious forces within the human being. We may ignore them until necessity compels us, or we may foster them consciously and allow them to arise more gently. They will unite those who produce, those who distribute, and those who consume. Nothing else belongs within them. Labor itself will increasingly come under the protection of law. Questions of labor must be resolved democratically, through mutual understanding. As a result, labor will be separated from the one force that truly governs economic life, the collective judgment that emerges within associations. Within economic associations, only goods will play a role, and this leads to a profound consequence. We will abandon fixed ideas of price and value. Price will no longer be treated as something absolute. Value will no longer be frozen. Instead, both will be understood as living realities, changing with circumstances, formed through shared insight. Price and value will arise from collective judgment. I cannot explore this fully here. Those who wish to go deeper may do so elsewhere. What matters now is the larger picture. Through careful observation, we discover that social life unfolds in three distinct realms, each shaped by different forces: spiritual life, legal and political life, economic life. In the course of modern history, these realms have begun to separate, each seeking its own integrity. The task before us is not to confuse them, nor to force one to rule the others, but to understand their independence and allow each what properly belongs to it. Only then can they collaborate in a healthy way. Many have noticed this threefold structure. Some have pointed to earlier thinkers who sensed aspects of it. Questions of precedence are unimportant. What matters is not who first spoke an idea, but whether it becomes alive in practice. If many people arrive at the same insight, that is a cause for joy. One thing, however, must be clearly understood. A mere division of society into parts leads nowhere. Life cannot be separated into compartments that ignore one another. Just as the human being cannot be understood by isolating organs, but only by seeing how systems work together, so society must be understood as a living whole. Each realm must operate according to its own nature, and precisely through this independence, they can form a true unity. This is the task of our time. When we learn how to establish spiritual life, political and legal life, and economic life, each upon its own native ground, drawing strength from its own true source, then unity does not need to be forced. It arises naturally. The social organism finds its wholeness not by domination, but by balance. Within each sphere, forces of decline inevitably appear. Yet these forces do not destroy the whole, because each realm is strengthened by its collaboration with the others. This is not a rigid division, not a separation into sealed compartments, but a living articulation. 3 movements within one body. And this unity is possible because every human being belongs to all 3 spheres at once. It is the human personality that binds them together. The individual stands at the crossing point of spirit, law, and economy, and through this living presence, the 3 become one. What we must therefore seek is not fragmentation, but articulation, a differentiation that allows a deeper unity to emerge. Even on the surface of history, this striving can be seen. For more than a century, humanity in Europe has been moving, often unconsciously, towards such an order. Even when people do not intend it, their actions reveal it. In spiritual life, in political and legal life, in economic life, they act in ways that prepare this articulation. It is demanded by the evolution of humanity itself. And we can recognize how this impulse entered history in the form of 3 ideals, 3 guiding lights for social life: liberty, equality, fraternity. At the end of the 18th century, these words echoed across Europe, and who today would deny that they express essential human longings? Yet in the 19th century, many sharp minds argued that these 3 ideals could never truly coexist within a single unified state. They demonstrated with impressive logic that liberty, equality, and fraternity contradict one another when forced into one centralized form. Their arguments were persuasive, and so humanity once again found itself facing a contradiction born of life itself. But life does not avoid contradictions. Life lives through them. At every step, life generates tension and then seeks reconciliation. It unfolds by carrying opposites together. In this sense, it was absolutely right that liberty, equality, and fraternity were proclaimed together. The error came later, when people believed that everything must be organized from a single center. They failed to see that the real question is not which system controls production, or which structure dominates economics. The real question is this: how can social life be shaped so that it resonates with the deepest impulses of the human being? To answer this, we must understand something vital. Liberty belongs to spiritual life, to the free, creative unfolding of the individual personality. Equality belongs to the political and legal sphere, where human beings meet one another as equals and determine together what is due to each. Fraternity belongs to economic life, where cooperation must arise through associations shaped by real conditions, not sentiment. Only when life is viewed this way does it come into focus. The belief that all 3 ideals could be realized uniformly within a single state has produced deep contradictions. Liberty, equality, and fraternity can live only when each finds its proper home. Liberty in spiritual life, equality in political and legal life, fraternity in economic life. Not as slogans, not as emotions, but as lived realities, social forms through which human dignity can truly be experienced. Truth can arise only where the spirit is free. Only what springs freely from the individual can be rooted in truth. Equality will not rest until it is realized in law and politics. This can be achieved through reasoned democratic processes, or else through upheaval. And fraternity can take form only within economic associations grounded in real conditions. When law arises from the genuine meeting of human beings where like encounters like, it becomes living law. Otherwise, it hardens into convention. And when cooperation in economic life is not rooted in true fraternity, it becomes routine, a mechanical existence without inner meaning. Only when we clearly perceive the chaos produced by empty catchwords in spiritual life, convention in place of law and routine instead of a living economy, do we begin to see the social problem as it truly is. What follows may surprise some. This is not an approach built on ideology or theory. It is drawn from reality itself, observed with care, and illuminated by a spiritual science oriented toward life. The fundamental questions of social life today are these. How do we move from slogans to truth, from convention to living law, from routine existence to a real way of life? The answer lies in a threefold social organism. Only through such articulation can liberty, equality, and fraternity become real. In this way, our time can find its rightful connection to the great impulses of the past. And Europe, answering the call once sounded in the West, can say out of its spiritual life, liberty in spiritual life, equality in political and legal life, fraternity in economic life. Through this understanding, the three spheres of society can learn to work together, not in confusion, but in harmony, and begin the healing of the spiritual, legal, and economic disorder of our time. Thank you for listening, for taking this moment to explore the nature of society and the human spirit. As Rudolf Steiner reminds us, true social renewal begins within the individual. The reflections you carry in your heart can ripple outward into the world. If these insights resonated with you, remember to like, share, and subscribe, so that this conversation may continue and grow with others seeking understanding. Until we meet again, remain conscious, thoughtful, and open to the currents of life moving through you.